Okay, let's get started in this final session of Streaming Forum 2013. We'll be talking about implementing HEVC and spend very little time talking about what HEVC is, talk about the key features, look quickly at the current status of the encoding and decoding market, focus on the 600-pound gorilla, or the elephant in the room that nobody talks about, which is the royalty issue. Then we'll look at HEVC in 4K, status of TV sets and content, and then we'll try and open the crystal ball and see where we think HEVC is going in the next 6 to 18 months. So HEVC is the successor to H.264. The reason we're all talking about it is that it got first stage approval in January of 2013. Essentially, it's open to market. Two very key features. One is same quality as H.264 at 50% the data rate. Same quality, lower data rate. The other one is the ability to encode videos up to 4K. So you get larger content, you get lower bit rate for existing content. If you speak to Thomson or TEM or InVivio, what they're saying for their first generation products is that they're achieving about 20% savings over H.264. And in one of the sessions earlier today, the gentleman from Thomson, Elaine, I'm forgetting the last name, said he felt it would take about 3 years to get to the 50% bandwidth at the same quality as H.264. He also made the point that you're going to see that primarily on 1080p plus content. So if you're encoding a 640 by 480 file today at 1.2 megabits per second, you're likely not going to be able to encode that at 600 kilobits per second in HEVC and see the same quality. On the other hand, if you're encoding a 1080p file at 3 megabits per second today, in 3 years you should be able to encode that at 1.5 megabits per second and see the same quality. But today, all the first generation HEVC implementations are talking 20 to 30%. So the 50% is not what they're seeing today. It's what they're projecting out with much less benefit in the short term. Okay, so what are the, that breaks down into two major benefit areas. So with videos at the 1080p, today's videos, you can save bandwidth, right? You can say, okay, I want to deliver the same video quality at a lower bandwidth and save bandwidth. So I'm, Sky or one of the big broadcasters here in the UK, I'm currently streaming at 1.2 megabits per second. I want to stream at 900 kilobits per second and save money. So that's, you've got same quality, lower bandwidth, you've got financial savings there. There's also a benefit for better reach. So DSL has less ability to transfer bandwidth the further you get from the DSLAM, the further you get from the origination point. So there will be some benefit for distributors and networks who are sending video over DSL to longer endpoints. So whereas you couldn't send, just a rough example, you couldn't send HD video if somebody was 2,000 yards from the DSLAM. Now you can send HD video up to 4,000 yards from the DSLAM. So you've got greater reach for HD. Same thing with mobile. You can send HD to mobile because you can encode HD content at lower data rates. That opens up a new business model. You're not necessarily saving any money. You're opening up a new revenue opportunity. And then if you're a telco or a service provider or a satellite provider, you've got a fixed pipe. You can now send more videos over the existing pipe without any drop in quality. So these are kind of the, this is the feature, and these are the kind of the high-level benefits and the market opportunities for HEVC. And of course, with 4K video, you open up a totally new market for 4K content. So right now, there's no market for 4K content outside the theater. So hopefully, this will bring 4K video to the home at some point. Okay, so encoding HEVC, I mean, Thomson, they're here, they're showing their 7,000 unit encoder that was used in a trial earlier this year to broadcast the French Open with Orange, the French cable TV provider. So encoding is here. You know, maybe the products aren't in final release, but they will be released within the next few months from a lot of other, from a lot of vendors, both Thomson, Vivio, Atem, Telestream says by the end of the year. HEVC encoding is not going to be the bar to HEVC adoption. There will be encoders available in the short term rather than the long term. That's not going to be the problem. Pure decoding is also not going to be the problem. So at NAB this year, Roby showed an Intel i7, a 4-core computer, playing 1080p content using about 50% of CPU. Okay, so we've talked about the benefits of HEVC compared to H.264. What are the negatives? The negatives are encoding complexity. People estimate it's going to take between 5x and 10x CPU to encode HEVC in the same time as it would take to encode H.264. The other side of that is the decode side. So people are estimating that HEVC decode is between 2 and 2.5x harder than H.264 decode. So what does that mean? It means that there's a lot of computers that shipped in the last year or so that can definitely play 1080p HEVC right now. So Multimedia Research Group is an analyst firm in the United States. They said that there's going to be 2.4 billion HEVC capable devices by the end of this year. What HEVC capable means they have the power to play HEVC, they don't have the software decoder to play it. So there's two issues to it, right? There's the power to play it, and then there's a generally available software player to play that. And that's what's not existing as we sit here and talk today. But if the software players were capable, we could have were available, we could have a very instant and significant market of HEVC capable players. And that's the problem. So we've got no major players have shipped yet on computers or mobile platforms. So that means Adobe Flash hasn't shipped, Apple hasn't shipped either for QuickTime or for Mac OS or for iOS. Google hasn't shipped anything for Android, and nobody's really talking about this. You don't hear anything from Adobe that says Flash is coming with HEVC decode. A very, very significant announcement, the announcement's already made, the shipment will be coming from DivX. This is a main concept powered HEV encoder and decoder. So DivX 10 has both encode, decode capabilities. Why is this significant? Because people can start to produce HEVC content. So they've got their HD cameras, there are even some 4K cameras out there. Nobody's producing HEVC today at the consumer level. Once you have consumer content encoded in HEVC, you start to create demand for HEVC capable players, both software players, which will come in the DivX bundle, but also hardware players like Blu-ray players, smart TV sets. So the whole certification program that DivX has set up for DVD players, smart TVs, and other consumer electronic devices will start to roll out with HEVC certifications. So in terms of priming the pump, in terms of getting things started, I think DivX 10 is probably the most exciting thing I've seen on the horizon. I think it really will start to get the content rolling. Once content's out there, more CE manufacturers will want to certify their devices. And once those devices are out there and there's enough HEVC software decoders, major content producers will want to distribute in HEVC because there's enough players to warrant the investment. So the pump has to start somewhere, and I think DivX 10 with HEVC should say encode and decode. I think that could be a major factor in that occurring. What's holding things up? What's the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about? just like H.264 had a royalty, HEVC is going to have a royalty. Now, I put this timeline up here because I wanted people to see how accelerated the rollout of HEVC is. I mean, we're talking about HEVC as if it's here now today. With H.264, the spec was approved in March 2003. Royalties were announced 7 months later. Okay, so 7 months after the spec was approved, anybody who wanted to use HEVC knew what it was going to cost. When Apple introduced QuickTime with H.264, it was 2.5 or a year and a half after royalties were announced. When Adobe came out with Flash in March 2008, it was 5 years after royalties were announced. And then when Microsoft put H.264 playback in Silverlight, it was 6 years. So now we're talking about HEVC, it's June, so we're 5 months after the product was standardized, we're talking about rolling out HEVC. We're very much more accelerated as compared to where we were with H.264. Now let's look at the H.264 license terms to kind of get a feel for what's coming. So if you're a manufacturer of encoders or decoders, the encoder vendors pay a fee, the decoder vendors pay a fee. So, Thomson's going to pay a fee for, they pay a fee for every H.264 encoder they ship. Anybody who's shipping quantities, I think, over 200,000 encoders has to pay a royalty. Matrox pays a royalty. Everybody who's using H.264 at the chip level, they have to pay a royalty. Decoder vendors also pay a fee. So when Adobe puts H.264 in Flash, they pay a fee. When they put H.264 encoding in Adobe Media Encoder and the Adobe Flash Live Media Encoder, they pay a fee. But there's a maximum payment of $5 million per company per year. So if you look at Adobe, they're amortizing gazillions of Flash players. They're amortizing all the Adobe Media Encoder versions that ship with Premiere Pro and After Effects, and they're amortizing all the free versions of Flash Live Media Encoder that they ship. So, and if you look at Microsoft, same thing. They've got all their Silverlight players, they've got their expression encoders, they've got all the H.264 encoding tools in the cloud. That's all part of that $5 million fee. So what, kind of off the topic, but why doesn't Mozilla want to incorporate H.264 playback into Firefox? Because it costs them $5 million. Okay, so, it's not a big deal if you're Google or Microsoft or Adobe. It's a real big deal if you're a smaller company. Now, who doesn't pay today? And you'll see why this is significant in a minute. So if you're a publisher, if you're ESPN, or if you're Sky or BBC, you don't pay any royalty for free internet video. There's no H.264 royalty for free internet video. If you're selling subscription or pay-per-view, if you're Netflix, you're paying an H.264 royalty. But if you're distributing free internet video, there is no royalty for H.264. So again, all the major corporations are streaming exclusively H.264 content now, and they're not paying anything to the patent group. And they never will. In perpetuity, free distribution of H.264 encoded video is free of any royalties. Corporations stream H.264 encoded video internally, and they pay no royalty. They buy the encoders as a royalty on that. They buy some hardware decoders as a royalty on that. But all the video they encode is encoded royalty-free. So if you were a H.264 patent holder, how would you feel about that? I mean, you've got BBC making fortunes, billions of dollars, billions of pounds, billions of euros based on your patents, and you're not getting a cent. So what happens now? All those patent holders who are pissed, and that's angry in US, not drunk, all those patent holders are now in the HEVC patent group. And the spec was approved in January 2013. In January 2013, there was a patent group set up, and royalties were announced within, by November. So we're talking 7 months. So here we are, 6 months after the announcement of HEVC, or the approval of HEVC. There's an MPEG HEVC group in process, but not all of the IP owners are represented. So with H.264, you make out a check. That $5 million check goes to one group. You know who that group is. You know what the costs are. MPEG LA distributes it. It's very simple. But not all of the IP owners, particularly those who are dissatisfied with the amount they got from H.264, are joining the patent group. So at this point, if you want to license HEVC, you may be subject to royalties from multiple parties. You may have to write checks of undetermined amounts to different groups of companies. Okay? So where we stand today, we don't know what the royalty is going to be. We don't know who we're going to pay it to. But we are 100% sure there's going to be one. For encoders and decoders, I mean, that's absolutely, there's going to be one. For free internet content, I'm guessing there's also going to be one. Then there may be some de minimis exceptions if the amounts streamed are small. My little website, we stream, pick a number, 1,000 streams a year. They're probably not going to go after me. But if you are a broadcaster, you're a large corporation, you're using HEVC encoded content internally, I think there's for external content, I think there's a 100% chance, if you're a big company, you're going to be paying some royalty on that HEVC encoded content. If you're a corporation, I think there's a really good chance you're going to be paying some royalty on the video that you use internally. So will this spawn competition? Interesting question, right? I mean, VP8 came out in the form of WebM. Going back to our timeline, we had the H.264 spec was approved in March 2003. Royalties announced here, QuickTime here, Flash here, Silverlight here. WebM came out in 2010. So not only were the royalty structure known, we had a very, very secure installed base of H.264 decoding. So WebM was trying to fight all this, and obviously it made very little inroads. Today, we've got nothing. We don't know what the royalty is going to be. Nobody's licensed it. Nobody's shipping it. And Google is set to release VP9. So what effect is that going to have on the market? Very interesting. About 2 or 3 months ago, Google signed a contract with MPEG LA to license all of the H.264 patents. So there was some issues. So Microsoft and Apple didn't implement WebM in their browsers because they said there were potential patent issues, and they didn't want to open themselves up to patent claims from third parties. Google licensed the H.264 patents from 12 of the 13 patent holders in H.264 in the MPEG LA group. So everybody thought they were fine, not only for WebM, but also for VP9, because the contract covered both VP8 and VP9. Then what happened? Nokia, who was the number 13, sued Google on video-related patents in Great Britain, Germany, and the US. So right now, VP9, if you use VP9 and you're a big company, you have a chance that Nokia will come after you. So the whole Ultra HD market, the whole what happens after H.264 market is kind of tied up. HEVC is tied up in that you don't know what it's going to cost, and VP9 is tied up because Nokia is going to sue you if you use it. So that's kind of where the market stands right now. And the only thing we know is that all the HEVC patent holders are really upset about how little they got from H.264. So what does that mean? What's that going to do? If you talk to the high-end encoding vendors, the Thomsons, the Telestreams, they're saying, look, this is a cost of doing business. we know there's going to be a license. We're reserving for it. We've made our own estimates, but we make high-end encoding tools. We need HEVC, so we're going to put that in there. And I don't think there's going to be any, they're not slowing down. They're launching their products. They're incorporating HEVC. In integrated circuits for encode decoders, same thing. I mean, they've got a gazillion chips. They can amortize the cost over. They're selling the chips. Life is good. They're proceeding as if the royalty issue isn't a problem. On the playback side, when Adobe made the decision to incorporate H.264 into Flash, they knew exactly how much it was going to cost them. And so did Apple, so did Microsoft, so did Google in Chrome. We don't have that today. Okay, so I think it's definitely slowing down the inclusion of HEVC in the major players. Now, would these companies have HEVC in their players today absent the royalty, or if the royalty was known? I don't think so. I think it's still too early. But certainly they would be much further along in the analysis if the royalty was known. And I think Rovi, they deserve a lot of credit for rolling out DivX 10, which again should really help the market. But I don't know. I mean, I would hate to be their accountants and their attorneys, right? Because you've got to reserve for it. They're a public company. So they've got to be saying, well, we're going to ship, it's a free download. So it could be millions, and with DivX 9 and H.264, it was $5 million total. Now nobody knows what it's going to be. So, and if you're a content publisher, so you're Sky TV, and you're saying, well, this HEVC stuff, this can reduce my bandwidth cost by 20%. I'm going to implement it right away. Well, there's a problem with that. Even though it may save you 20%, it also may cost you some undetermined amount. So if I'm a content producer and I'm counting on bandwidth savings to pay the cost of these streams I'm going to encode, I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. I mean, the bandwidth cost is fixed, but I don't know what it's going to cost me to get that bandwidth cost. So I think if I'm a content publisher, I'm thinking, I'm not going to use this until I absolutely know what it's going to cost me. But that's just me. I mean, every company is going to make their own decision, but I think it has a very chilling effect on the adoption of HEVC among content publishers who are seeking the bandwidth savings, right? Because it's going to cost them something. So what about 4K video? What is that going to do for HEVC adoption? This is Display Search. They're a US analyst. They're projecting in 2013, maybe 600,000 units. At the end of 2014, they're thinking there's going to be a little bit over 2 million units. So we've got 3 million units of 4K TVs by the end of 2014, by the end of next year. I mean, that is not a huge market by anybody's standards. And the ergonomics really don't warrant much of a faster adoption. I mean, there are, how much detail your eyes can perceive. I mean, there's math behind that. And at normal, at 10 feet, maybe the normal distance to your TV, you need a 77-inch screen to see the difference between 1080p and 4K. And that was one of the things that slowed down 1080p as compared to 720p. Because you either need to be really close to the TV to see the difference, or you needed to have a really, really big TV set. And it's the same math as it relates to 4K. So I don't think a lot of people are finding a compelling reason to buy a 4K TV, particularly because there's very little content. So a lot of movies are being shot in 4K, and those are all going to be available. Films can be rescanned at 4K, and you should expect that to happen. But in terms of television content currently shot in 4K, I think that's a very, very, very tiny number. Very few TV shows are shooting that, anywhere. I think that'll happen. You'll start to see some sports, some other content shot in that way, but I don't think that's going to be a huge driver for 4K content. Anybody looked at the value proposition for the Sony 4K TV set? You paid $25,000. You got a hard drive with 10 movies, and every month or so they would send somebody out with a different hard drive so you could watch 10 more movies. And that was $25,000. So of course you could watch upscaled content, but upscaled content you're going to see limited benefits. I mean, the value proposition of some of the early TVs is pretty questionable unless you're like a Russian oligarch or, and you have just total money to burn. Any Russian oligarchs in the room? I'm not trying to. So, and again, we've gone from fact. The fact is we don't know what the royalty is. Now we're going to my opinion, right? And everybody can have differing opinions, and mine's no better than anybody else's. But from my perspective, the value proposition is you can save 20% of the bandwidth, but you don't know what it's going to cost you. There's no free players available yet today, except for DivX10, and that's going to get pretty wide distribution, but it's not going to get flash-like penetration. It'll get 10 or 15% penetration, not 98% penetration. So nobody's going to distribute, not nobody, but ESPN is not going to start distributing HEVC encoded content to play on the DivX players, right? They're looking for a much more ubiquitous market. And then on the 4K side, you've got very little content and very few TVs. That's not going to be a big driver for HEVC content in the short term. So where will HEVC appear first? Again, this is my opinion. Some of this is based on stuff I learned here at the show, some of the research that I've done. But clearly it's going to be where the savings are very evident and significant, where you can count on getting every bit of that 20%. And also where the products are expensive so they can absorb the royalty. So I think one of the biggest markets is going to be primary distribution. So here you have, the studio here sending out a broadcast signal to a lot of the affiliates, whether in a traditional broadcast or in an IPTV or even an OTT setting. You can use HEVC here on the encode side and decode it here, and then decode or transcode that to MPEG-2 or to H.264 for distribution to existing set-top boxes or OTT devices. So what you're spending for satellite time. That's very expensive. You can save that 20%. You can bank it. You can count on it. The royalty cost isn't going to be that high here and here. So this is one application that I think will be pretty rich for HEVC use in the short term. I think high-end telepresence. Telepresence are the highest of the high-end systems. $5,000 to $25,000 for an endpoint. If you can cut your bandwidth costs by 20% or 30%, say in 6 to 12 months, you can absorb the cost of the royalty and the savings is going to be there. So I see that as a big early adapter. New IPTV and OTT installations. I don't see a lot of people replacing existing set-top boxes that are using H.264 or MPEG-2 with HEVC in the short term. But if you can reach customers with HD content that you couldn't reach before, then it may make sense to use HEVC to do that. Once again, this is a paid subscription-based service, so you're going to make money. It's not a free service. And then again, I think DivX10 is going to be a very interesting launch, from a lot of different perspectives. It's going to, lots of new HEVC content. We'll see some consumer electronics players that are HEVC capable get certified and start to play it, and that could just start the ball rolling. I think it's one of the most exciting things in this market coming. In the general purpose streaming market, I see the royalty being settled as a precursor to any major activity. I don't see any of these companies announcing royalties on their platforms until they know what it's going to cost them. And this is total guesswork, but I'm hoping by the end of the year they can get the royalty picture clear. It's in everybody's interest. The people who are collecting the money, the people who are paying the money, everybody wants to know what it's going to cost. So let's hope there's going to be some, at least a first stab at what the royalty structure is going to be by the end of this year. I have no information that backs this up. Right? Nobody's talking to me at MPEG LA. They're not saying a word. So this is just a total wild-ass guess. And if this happens by December, I'm thinking we'd see movement from one of these companies or one of the major OTT companies by the first quarter of 2014. And I think once that starts to happen, you'll start to see general purpose streams using HEVC encoded content. So I think closed systems first, where you're selling the encoder, you're selling the decoder, you're licensing, it's a pay per monthly, OTT, IPTV, that's going to be first. And then general purpose streaming, much later down the line. That's all I got. Any questions?
When you look at the royalties, you sort of, in terms of the impact on players, you broke it into 4 areas, and you said you thought it would be okay for the encoder guys, okay for the IC guys, problem for the publishers. I get all those 3. You said you think it will be a problem for the decoder guys, Apple, Adobe, Google. Why can't they just go, well, hey, we're just going to amortize that, we're big, we can afford it, obviously, there'll be some limits on it. Well, what's the difference between them and the IC guys?
So what's the difference between, to repeat the question, what's the difference between the IC guys, integrated circuit guys, and I think the Adobes they're having more potential pieces of it. So Adobe can get, they're going to have HEVC encoding in the Adobe Media Encoder, every version of Premiere Pro, decode in every version of Premiere Pro. They're not getting paid for the versions of Flash. The IC manufacturers are getting paid for every chip they ship. Same thing with Apple. They've got encode side, free decoder, hardware encoder, hardware decoder. So it's just, there's more pieces in the puzzle for them, and I think it's harder to, but I could be wrong. I mean, either way, it's not going to be $100 million. So they may decide to say 50 million, okay, let's do it. But I don't think, until a lot of the other stuff, particularly the content side, I don't see, if I'm Adobe, until people start using this, why do I want to include it in my player? And until the royalty is set, I don't see any free distributor of internet content, which is by far the most that's being viewed out there, using HEVC, because you'd be crazy to. Because the savings, you can't bank on the savings until you know what the cost is going to be. Anything else? Listen, thanks y'all for coming to the show. It was a great one for the speakers and for the organizers, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and got a lot of it as well.